All right. Hi, everyone. Apa kabar? Salam sejahtera. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to Indonesia's Unlocking Capital for Sustainability 2022 event on investment opportunities in Indonesia's green growth. This event is brought to you by Ecobusiness in partnership with Jakarta Investment Center and PT Penjaminan Infrastruktur Indonesia. We're glad that you could join us today. This event is part of a series of UCFS events across Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and India. So while the Malaysian event has recently concluded, you can still register for our Philippines and India events on the 8th and 15th September, respectively. These UCFS events lead up to the main hybrid event on the 21st September in Singapore. So my name is Ami Firdaus, and I'm very pleased to be hosting you today. Over the next 2 hours, we will have some distinguished experts share on these investment opportunities for a stronger Indonesia. First, we'll have a keynote presentation by Dr. Yuki Wardana, Senior Vice President at PT Penjaminan Infrastruktur Indonesia. This will be followed by a panel discussion by some of Indonesia's leading voices on investment for the country's green growth ambitions. The panel discussion will be moderated by my esteemed colleague, Megan See, who is Director of Partnerships at Ecobusiness. Now, do allow me to set some context before handing over the time to the keynote speaker. Now, why are we here today? We're here to talk about green investment in Indonesia. And ASEAN giant Indonesia holds the G20 presidency this year and has unveiled the theme of Recover Together, Recover Stronger to rally global efforts to build an inclusive and green recovery in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic and rising geopolitical tensions. The country's inaugural G20 presidency, as well as its upcoming turn as ASEAN chair for 2023, will advance Indonesia's regional and international engagement on sustainable development. The platform has also allowed the country to align its emerging market to address its ESG-related challenges. Now, the recent event on scaling up the utilization of sustainable finance instruments, developing sustainable finance was highlighted as one of the 6 priorities of Indonesia's G20 presidency, while the commitment of Indonesia's financial institutions to support a sustainable financial market ecosystem was reinforced. At the city level, players such as the Jakarta Investment Center have been laying the groundwork for channeling more investment into Jakarta's resilience in accordance with the National Action Plan to reduce greenhouse gases emissions and in support of the post-pandemic economic recovery. Now, JIC has been doing so through engaging global investors and green project owners across areas such as infrastructure, transport, food, waste management, and water at the Jakarta Investment Forum. The presidency is welcomed as a timely platform for developing nations to shape the post-COVID recovery strategy and for Indonesia to play a stronger role in driving sustainable development in the region. A recent study, however, showed that the country will need to invest about $200 billion a year in low carbon initiatives till 2030 in order to meet its declared net zero target by 2060. Now, as government coffers can only fund less than half of this, there is therefore an urgent need and a potential for other forms of capital to invest in sustainable infrastructure development. Its economy is projected to be the 7th largest in the world by 2030. Meanwhile, there's also a lack of capacity to implement such projects, especially in the remote areas of the archipelago, while the lack of infrastructure financing hinders efficient and green economic growth. It is estimated that Indonesia currently requires USD 322.86 billion to meet its emission target. Jakarta alone has untapped potential for private finance players looking to plug into green projects. Private finance only accounted for 2% of total climate finance in Jakarta, which is about USD $925 million flowing into climate activities in Jakarta between 2015 to 2019, with 89% using balance sheet debt. Now, with this, there are naturally some questions in mind. Where are the investment opportunities at this critical juncture of Indonesia's growth, and how will the country overcome its capacity and funding challenges? Now, I'm sure our distinguished panel will unpack these questions and more later on, but first, to start picking at some of these questions, Dr. Yuki Wardana, who is Senior Vice President at PT Penjaminan Infrastruktur Indonesia, will deliver a keynote presentation. Now, do allow me to introduce him briefly. Dr. Wardana has an extensive and decorated background in forestry and environmental work. An alumnus of Bogor Agricultural Institute, he has almost 2 decades of professional experience in this field. Today, he serves as Senior Vice President at PT Penjaminan Infrastruktur Indonesia, as well as the Chairman of the Indonesia Environmental Sciences Association. Dr. Wardana also lectures at the University of Indonesia and has written for more than 10 international journals. Now, Dr. Yuki Wardana, the floor is yours. Silakan.
Thank you, Amy, for introducing me, and good afternoon and great day from Bali. Let me greet first to our honorable speakers, Pak Pradana Mukti from PT SMI, my colleagues Bu Josie or Bu Josephine from IGCN, and Zu from Polynesians. Thank you, Ecobusiness, for inviting us in this session. Today, I would like to present PTPII or IGF roles in driving Indonesia green infrastructure development. I hope this presentation can be a bridge to discussion in the next sessions. Next, the agenda will be explained in three parts. The first is how to IGF role in driving Indonesia green infrastructure landscape, and how to IGF investing in a sustainable infrastructure development for Indonesia green growth. And the last is the pathway to net zero 2060 for Indonesia. Next, let us start the presentation on explaining about the budget needed for infrastructure development and energy transition in Indonesia. According to long-term plan year 2020 until 2024, Indonesia at least needs around 6,445 trillion rupiah for development budget, where only 37 can be financed through the state budgeting or APBN, then 21% are done through a state-owned enterprise, and the biggest portion of 42% or equivalent or 2,707 trillions will be done by encouraged participation from private sector or investor to finance the infrastructure. But we know for sure that COVID-19 and pandemic bring enormous pressure to all countries in the world, including Indonesia. That's why the portion of private sector or investor to be involved in infrastructure development in Indonesia will be even bigger. One of the collaboration scheme prepared by the government of Indonesia is a public-private partnership scheme, and PPP scheme itself in Indonesia has been developed really well. I think more than 30 projects have been signed, and most already reached operation or operational stage. There are already 20 infrastructure sector mentioned in regulations that could be cooperated through PPP scheme in Indonesia. The progress of PPP in Indonesia is partially due the seriousness of government of Indonesia to strengthening PPP ecosystem in Indonesia with strengthening to supporting instrument in the form of viability gap fund, project development facilities, and issuing a single window government guarantee through Indonesia Infrastructure Guarantee Fund or PTPII. Now we move to the energy transition. Just like infrastructure development, energy transition in Indonesia from coal to green energy requires enormous funding. According to data from the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, requires the investment up to $1 trillion by the year until 2060 for the renewable power plant and transmission. That number could be even higher if many of the current power plants to be terminated. Cooperation and collaboration from all stakeholders in renewable energy, including public, private, and business-to-business partnership, take an important role on ensuring that all the potential of renewable energy can be used. Moreover, next I will explain a bit about IGF and its role for infrastructure development in economy Indonesia. PT Penjaminan Infrastruktur Indonesia, or we know IGF, is a state-owned enterprise within a share 100% owned by government of Indonesia under the direct supervision from Ministry of Finance. The company is established as a single window instrument for the provision of government guarantee for PPP in Indonesia, where the government of Indonesia through Ministry of Finance as General Exchequer, or we know Bendahara Umum Negara, based on law, assign IGF or PT PII as a sovereign guarantee entity, with basically aim to cover what government contracting agency financial obligation that would affect project sustainability. IGF has a mandate from the Ministry of Finance to accelerate the development of sustainable infrastructure for improving the quality of life of Indonesia people. Therefore, PT PII or IGF is expected to be a project enabler and financing enabler. Until today, on carrying out its mandate, IGF has 5 services. Those are PPP project guarantee, national guarantee, national strategic project guarantee, SOE credit guarantee, PPP project development facilities, national economic recovery, or in Indonesia we know Pemulihan Ekonomi Nasional program. Of all 5 mandate mentioned, what I mentioned before, there is one product outside of the guarantee that is project development facilities. I think Pak Pradana and SME the same mandate from Ministry of Finance to develop project development facilities that is implemented based on arrangement or assignment from the Ministry of Finance to assist the government contracting agency on project preparation and transition to develop the project structure that are feasible, bankable, and can implement it a good risk management. As single window provider that also task a risk manager, looking at the risk project is not only from the financial and technical aspect, but whether to include environmental and social risk that carries more significant risk. On the next slide, I will explain environmental social management framework in the guarantee process. IGF or PT PII since its establishment consider the importance of the environmental and social aspect. Therefore, environmental and social aspect becomes a part of our decision regarding guarantee. We have prepared a framework that is called Environmental Social Management Framework, or ESMF. ESMF is defined a set policy, procedure, and tools to manage environmental and social aspect, start from the preparation states, construction states, and operation to ensure all the project is accordance with applicable regulation. According to its definition, ESMF is defined as all guarantee process that include the first stage is a project screening, after that appraisal, risk mitigation plan, and until the concession of the agreement and our project monitoring. The principle of ESMF are consist of 8 parts or 8 indicator or 8 principle. Those are environmental and social risk impact assessment, labor and working condition, resources efficiency and pollution prevention, community health and safety, biodiversity conservation, land acquisition and involuntary resettlement, cultural heritage, and indigenous people. We acknowledge that risk management concept, especially on environmental and social, cannot be done individually, but needs to be integrated with the other component in ecosystem of infrastructure. On the next slide, we will look at how environmental risk management is carried out in a PPP ecosystem in Indonesia. We know many articles state the environmental risk is the major risk with higher possibility to occur in the world. The World Economic Forum on this Global Risk Report 2022 state that environmental risk is top 3 three major risks that the world could face on the next 10 years. And according to the statement, the component of ecosystem in Indonesia is very much concerning the environmental risk management. Let us look deeper on its those component. Lender as the biggest financier like PT SMI is looking to mitigate risk as much as possible to ensure the money loan could be returned in time and safely. Therefore, due diligence regarding risk that is done truly including due diligence in environmental and social aspect. The same could be said regarding the appetite from investor. It's also IGF as a guarantor also has concern risk management in environmental and social. The Ministry of Finance as main part of the financing ecosystem in Indonesia also high concern on environmental and social as well a government contracting agency or GCA. If all elements had the same concern regarding the environmental and social aspect, then we could ensure the PPP in Indonesia will be sustained. And for this slide, I will explain how to IGF will fully support and become the main component of the government of reaching its target of net zero emission by 2060. We acknowledge that upon reaching the target will need a good collaboration, as I mentioned before on the start of the presentation. Through the strategy that we have done through a good stakeholder collaboration, IGF will be a project enabler and financial enabler upon reaching the target of net zero emission by 2060. Looking on the IGF or PTPI portfolio, there are at least 6 renewable energy projects that it's guaranteed by IGF or PTPI. Those are mini hydro power plant in Lapai, and then geothermal power plant in Dieng 2 and Patuha 2, then hydroelectric power plant in Bakaru 1, Bakaru 2, and also sustainable and reliable energy access program in Jawa and development of distribution transmission in Kalimantan, Maluku, and Papua. Currently, we are evaluating the final stage of waste management that will be processed toward derivative product that could be reduced up to 80% of waste in Java, 3 waste to energy project in Indonesia, in Jakarta, Tangerang, and so on. And on this September, we'll be assigning one of a guarantee agreement of the street lighting PP project in Madiun that could potentially reduce electricity usage by up to 80%. We will not stop from here, but we will keep moving to develop a green infrastructure in Indonesia. Lastly, I would like to point out of the IGF portfolio that until today has issued overall guarantee on a 42 project with valuation of 476 trillion rupiah in various sectors spread all over in Indonesia. One of the main things that make grateful to I work at IGF on how IGF deliver its role to creating a better living for Indonesia people through sustainable and green infrastructure. For example, Ring project and multinational satellite that grants internet to access to outer island in Indonesia. 6 water supply project guaranteed by IGF could be given 5 new water resources to 5 million people and many other benefits that could be given. Until 2022, we have been delivered more than 50 CSR program in 7 sector. Some of the program disaster emergency response and health sector is a synergy with other special mission vehicle. And during COVID-19, we also help CSR in social health sectors. This is convey our information. Thank you for your attention. I hand it back to Amy and Megan. Thank you.
Terima kasih, and thank you, Dr. Yuki Wardana, for that keynote. So from now to about, for over the next, hour or so, our panelists for 45 minutes to an hour. So our panelists for today will dive deeper on how to understand and approach these investment opportunities in Indonesia's green growth to unlock more capital for sustainability. So Megan, the floor is yours for the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ami and Dr. Yuki, for setting the context of our discussion this afternoon so well. I'm Megan Su, Director of Partnerships for Ecobusiness, and I'm very honored to be your moderator today. So just as I introduce our speakers, I really like our attendees to answer a poll that we have prepared for you, which we will take into the panel discussion as well. So the poll here, which Ben had just put up, what should Indonesia's key priority be to scale investments into sustainable infrastructure projects? Options are there for you to click away. But as we start to see answers on the screen, it's now my great pleasure to introduce to you our panel of distinguished speakers this morning. So firstly, we have Ibu Josephine, Executive Director of Indonesia Global Compact Network, a local network of United Nations Global Compact in Indonesia, and has had more than 30 years of professional experience in multinational and national corporations and international organizations. We next have Pradana Murthy, Director of Risk Management of PTSMI, a state-owned enterprise with the goal of serving as a catalyst for accelerating national infrastructure development in Indonesia. Pradana also previously served as the head of sustainable finance at PTSMI. We next have Zoe Witten, Head of Impact of Pollination, a specialist climate change investment and advisory firm, where she assists companies and investors to navigate the impacts of climate change and to build new businesses and products which are transition aligned. Last but not least, we've just heard from Dr. Yuki, so he requires really no introduction other than setting that context for earlier on as well. So thank you, speakers, for taking the time to be with us virtually today. So audience, please do stay engaged in our conversation using our chat function, and we will be having a Q&A session later on with our speakers as well. So please feel free to put in your feedback and comments as we go along. So with that, I would like to pose the first question to all our speakers. And the first question really is, in your view, what is one reason for the increasing importance of the need to invest in sustainable infrastructure development for Indonesia? I'm going to go in the order which I introduce our speakers. I'm going to go to Ibu Josephine first.
Thank you, Megan. Indonesia is a big archipelago. We have 17,000 islands and more than 170 million people to connect for trading, marketing, education, tourism, and so on. Hence, the need to invest in a sustainable infrastructure development for sure. Now, sustainable infrastructure is definitely a long-term investment. It has to take sustainability as very important aspect, and the impact on the environment, social, and the governance aspects very important. In UN Global Compact, we call business to integrate their business strategy and operations with the 10 universal principles of the UN Global Compact in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you so much, Josephine. I'm going next to Pradana. Please provide your response to the first question.
Yeah, I think with regards to sustainable development, yeah, it's all clear. It's a global agenda, and it has been something that Indonesia has subscribed to in the form of Paris Agreement, yeah, the NDC target of 2030, and then the net zero emissions target for all G20 members for 2060. And our national governments also issued presidential regulations back in 2017 on sustainable development goals. So it's all been clear and all been rectified. And our mission, SMI mission, as one of the SOE actively promoting sustainable finance, I think this is going to be the guides. And I think the question is not why we're doing this, is how.
Thank you so much, Pradana, for that. And I'm going to move on to Zoe.
Thanks so much, Megan. I am talking about this obviously from outside Indonesia, and so reflecting on it from that angle. obviously, and this is something that we face in a number of regions. The need to invest in sustainable infrastructure, I guess, comes from just the importance of sustainable infrastructure for the future of Indonesia and the future for many of the countries we work in. If the country doesn't have it, it is a disadvantage today, and also a disadvantage that, as we have seen in the recent experience that we've had with energy prices, a disadvantage that can grow over time. And particularly for Indonesia as an exporter, as a site for manufacturing, steering infrastructure development in a sustainable direction can be very positive now, but also can create a growing advantage for the future.
Thank you so much, Zoe, for that. And last but not least, Dr. Yuki, would you like to provide your comments on that?
Yeah, thank you, Megan. Basically, infrastructure is a need, especially on infrastructure that it's related to basic necessities. On the other hand, Indonesia, as a developing country, has a huge area, as Bu Josie stated before, and infrastructure is needed to build interconnection between one province to other province to achieve sustainable economic growth equally. There is also a premise that state that the development of a country can be seen of its sustainable infrastructure development. And in this current economic recovery situation, I think in Indonesia, sustainable infrastructure development that consider and focus into all aspects from upstream to downstream of the infrastructure is very important. It must addresses that economic, social, cultural, and environmental aspect of the community to build integrated sustainable infrastructure development. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Dr. Yuki, and thank you for all speakers for setting that foundation really for our conversation today. I'm just going to go back to our poll because the question there again, the key priority for Indonesia to scale investments into sustainable infrastructure projects. And I guess the responses are quite even, except for the one point, implement policies to attract more private investments. So I'm actually going to address that private investment point right now, because but that Indonesia, it has a goal to reach peak national GHG emissions by 2030 and a net zero emission 2060 goal with the state revenue and expenditure budget allocating about 30% of its budget to this targeted transition. Research actually conducted by Climate Policy Initiative found that Indonesia will actually require investment of about USD 250 billion through to 2030 to finance its climate goals, which means that about USD 175 billion needs to be filled by other sources. So, I mean, the private sector investment then, would play quite a big role in fulfilling this financing need, but the progress on this front is quite slow. So I want to ask the speakers next, what is your perspective on the lack of private investments being channeled into Indonesia's green growth? I'm going to go to Ibu Josephine first as well.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. As corporate sustainability initiatives increasingly become part of core business strategy, leaders are rethinking the future of corporate finance and corporate investments to advance social goods. In the United Nations Global Compact, we provide the guidance and resources finance executives need to transform their business models and incorporate the SDGs into their business models. A move that can open $12 trillion in market opportunities. There is enormous potential to align corporate investment and finance with the SDGs, both to finance business contributions toward the SDGs and to build existing sustainable finance solutions and framework to support the transition to sustainable development. New and adapted business models and markets represent critical and value-generating investment opportunities for both profit and impact.
Thank you so much, Ibu. Thank you for that. I'm going to go to Pradana next to comment on this as well.
Yeah, SMI constantly sits in a unique position. We are a government owned entity, but in the same time, we are also a limited liability company. So we can think both ways, and we can think from public sector perspective and also private sector perspective. So from the public sector perspective, I think the energy sector has come second in the importance. Yeah, first is forestry. In terms of the greenhouse gas emission reduction, but there also a need to accelerate energy investment overall to achieve growth, economic growth. And I think the projection is that Indonesia will reach its peak emission in 2030. So we're not there yet. So it's still growing, and we are still going to pollute more. There's going to be a balancing act that the public sector is going to regulate. In one hand, growth, and in another is sustainability. But in the overall policy is not perfect yet. It's not providing a level playing field between high emissions activity and as well as sustainable activities. But things are and several initiatives are gearing towards that directions. It's just that public will see some inconsistency in public policy. But for me, someone is slightly on the outside trying to think on the inside. It's somewhat understandable, although it's also in the same time frustrating. In the private sector perspective, all they want to see is a consistent policy, a level playing field, and enough incentives. And so that's what they need.
Thank you so much, Pranav, for providing that consistent policy, perspective. Zoe, going on to you. I know that you're looking into Indonesia from outside, which is a very valuable perspective you bring. What are your thoughts on this?
I just wanted to, I guess, add to what Pradana said and also reinforce it a little bit. We just reflecting on the growth of green industries and the industries that underpin green infrastructure more broadly. There is often a really big difference between setting ambition for private investment and then actually unlocking that investment. And we see that world over at the moment. It's as many of you will know, it's a really big part of the conversation that is happening coming into COP27 about sort of leveraging private investment, particularly in emerging markets. But we see it in all markets, even when there is pledges, you might say, in place or promises in place from private sector who are saying we want to invest, we want to put money down. And the point about consistent policy and sufficient incentives is a really good and important one. I just want to deepen it a bit on that front, because private investors, as everyone knows, have to invest against a funding model. So even if they want to put capital down, they need to see business models that they can trust, that they think are going to be durable, that they think are going to flourish in the midterm. And particularly when we talk about upcoming industries, often the first round of national target setting does create some certainty. It helps, it starts to create that policy direction, but it doesn't always create the demand that we need to build business models and therefore to mobilize a lot of funding. And I say this not just in the electricity sector, but also in adjacent sectors. The space that's considered sustainable infrastructure, as everyone on this call knows, is growing rapidly. And a lot of those developments in adjacent industries really require very determined policy support. And the policy requirements that we see, we've just done a review of regions which have had a really great success unlocking that kind of investment. And those policy programs are quite specific and they're quite deep. And they often include picking winners. So picking industries that the country is going to decide to play in and really leaning into those and making sure that policy is consistent and reinforcing for those sectors.
Thank you so much, Zoe, for providing that. And Dr. Yuki, I wanted to also get your thoughts on this. After all that's been said, by Bu Josephine, by Pradana, by Zoe as well, what is your perspective on the lack of private investments being channeled into Indonesia? And I guess also following from that, how is PTPI helping with that?
Yeah, thank you, Megan. In my personal view, private investment that invest in green industry has been developed before. Or if we compare, I think compare with the one decade ago. It looked rather slow and small compared to an existing industry or energy sectors. It's look rather slow and small compared to an existing industry or energy sectors. From what I have since the government Indonesia has a target and a roadmap to change from the existing industry or energy sectors to green and to green industry and energy. One of the main challenges in energy sector is a lot of electricity generation already has long duration. Thus, when there is a sudden change, will be a huge termination caused by the government and or PTPL, and therefore it needs a proper or gradually a staging for the change. Moreover, the willingness to pay for renewable energy has considerably a gap that affect the willingness to pay from the society. Therefore, an affordable technology and alternative financing is needed to spur the development of the green industry and green energy. Thank you, Miguel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yuki. And it actually leads me quite perfectly into my next question. You talked about, I guess, kind of innovative financing schemes that are needed in order to, channel financing into the areas where needed to help Indonesia transition to net zero 60. So the Indonesia's finance ministry has stated that Indonesia will require about US 6.9 trillion per year for green infrastructure construction to achieve its 2030 sustainable development targets. And as we already know, there's only so much that public funding can do to support this. So then my question is, what kinds of innovative financing schemes are there already right now in Indonesia to fill this financing gap? I am going to go to Pradana first, and then if so, we can comment this off and on like you and Dr. Yuki as well. Pradana, please.
First, I can say that SMI itself is a form of innovation. Yeah. So because we, as a entity owned by government, we already have some leading innovations already in place, like green bond. We are the first corporation that issued green bond. Yeah. Also we applied ESMF that is on par with the international practice. We have a dedicated division which I previously headed, the Sustainable Finance Division. We also the first entity in Southeast Asia accredited by Green Climate Fund. So a lot of innovation that has been done by SMI itself. Yeah. Outside of from that, together with the Ministry of Finance, we have developed a blended finance platform called SDG Indonesia One. By the name of it, you can guess what it is. It's already achieved or amassed in terms of pledges in amount of $3.2 billion US. So in terms of appetite, there are appetites of investment in SDGs here, as well as in green and climate projects. But that's still in the level of pledges. I can say half of it that has already been realized in the form of commitments. Yeah, and a quarter of it is in the form of projects. Yeah, so it's not yet there, but we're getting there. And this year, SMI again with Ministry of Finance. Launching a energy transition mechanism, which is another blended finance platform, which is this time it will involve a certain government fiscal policies in there and a certain government fiscal support. But again, trying to attract international investments, it's the main theme here for blended finance in energy transition, and trying to work out how to actually finance the coal early retirement. So because doing things in renewable energy is one thing, this is the main target, but also to speed up the NDC and the NZE target. I think with the current excess supplies in Indonesia, we are forced to think about coal early retirement as well. I think that's what I can explain.
Thank you so much, Pradana. I'm going to go to Dr. Yuki first, and then Zhu, I've got a separate kind of like side question there for you because Pradana did mention that. But Dr. Yuki, we'd love to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, I think like any other challenge on the infrastructure development, the risk of land acquisition is still biggest challenge. Like in any other developing countries, private sector still seen the risk of change in law, political risk, and are also the biggest risk according to them. Thing can be done by IGF to ensure this are. First, IGF needs to issue guarantee on risk or on related land acquisition, change in law risk, and political risk to ensure that comfortness of investor and lenders. The second, IGF design the guarantee process to not only ends after the signing on the guarantee agreement, but to design the guarantee process using the risk management framework, thus ensuring that risk monitoring of the project through the joint monitoring committee can be established that consists of IGF, private sector, and other stakeholders related to GCA. In our experience, the GMC is an effective tools to risk monitoring. Therefore, any risk can be mitigated since its initial states, including environmental and social risk. If we speaking about environmental and social aspect, IGF also has a dedicated division for ENS, environmental and social risk assessment, that involved during the guarantee lifetime process since screening, appraisal, structuring, and monitoring stream. Thank you, Miguel.
Thank you, Dr. Yuki. And Zoe, for you, we've heard from Pradana and Yuki on what kind of financing schemes there are available in Indonesia, but we'd love to also hear a perspective on what is available, outside, but also more importantly, what is needed to increase the attractiveness of international private investment to these schemes.
The good questions. Let me start on the point of what is available outside, because I want to bring it into the point about how you can make some of this more attractive. And what I'm talking about there is that there are, as many on the call know intimately, a set of norms and approaches that are developing in the international finance community. And connecting with those norms and approaches is a really good way to help investors, international institutional investors, understand how these schemes relate to some of the priorities that they're developing. But let me talk about some of those norms first. And there's two that I probably would talk about the most. The first is that obviously there is a really rapidly growing interest and ongoing work internationally to get climate action plans in place for big institutional investors and also for banks. And many of those climate action plans to date have included a lot about risk and target setting, but they also include asset allocation. And I think, depending on what happens at COP27, they might start to include needing to fund transition in emerging markets as well for some international institutional investors. So that's a really big trend, which many will be familiar with, but is resulting in a reorientation from those institutional investors, and they're starting to think about, where can I support this? Where can I get exposure to these themes, including in emerging markets? The other thing I would just highlight is the absolute, it's been mentioned by the speakers, but there's been an explosion in sustainability linked activity in financing, institutional financing globally. And lots of you will have been involved with it. And it's really, really important for Southeast Asia particularly, and arguably needs to develop further internationally and also in the region to be able to access and provide financing to some of the transition efforts that we're seeing, not only the growth of green industries. And that's to that point about coal closure, which is such a challenging thing, but which is something that a number of regions are grappling with, and is obviously a really key operating space or possible operating space for sustainability linked financing. What I would note about that is that sustainability linked financing always needs appropriate strategy underpinning it. We work with a lot of capital providers, and the first thing a lot of people say to us is, we've been approached for sustainable financing from a government or from a company or from a project, but we just don't see enough visible infrastructure that allows us to understand what the sustainability strategy is, that the risks have been taken into account, And so that underlying strategy development is a really, really important part of accessing that sustainability linked financing. But coming to the question of how do you crowd private international financing into some of these schemes, the number one thing I would highlight is connecting it with those two themes. So making it clear that the schemes that you have available and are developing the innovations actually relate directly to those climate action plans and those transition funding plans that institutional investors are developing. And also making sure that there is sufficient strategy that's visible to the right people to make that sustainability linked piece available and appealing to that increasing market of institutional investors who are playing in that space.
Thanks, Zoe, for that. There's a lot to unpack from there. But I know you mentioned, funding challenges, also transition challenges as well as we head towards, Indonesia's climate goals. And I wanted to go to Ibu Josephine on this because we know that, one of IGCN's role is to, create cooperation opportunities through multi-stakeholder engagement, collective action to lead to, I guess, a more tangible result. So how is IGCN, promoting that multi-stakeholder partnership to overcome Indonesia's funding capacity challenges to accelerate green growth? You're on mute, Josephine.
Yes, thank you, Megan. Yeah, IGCN aligning with the UN Global Compact strategies and ambitions, of course, taking on the responsibility to drive progress at speed and at scale to make the Agenda 2030 possible. We mobilize business by promoting 5 thematic focus for Indonesia in the areas of business for peace, women empowerment, a better living environment, business ethics and governance, and education and teaching transformation. Also aligning with, of course, with the 10 principles and the SDGs. We also, lead and support a wide range of activities such as accelerated programs, training and peer learning sessions, a webinar, capacity building, and so on. And promoting strong partnerships and collaborations, of course. We are engaging as many stakeholders as possible to develop post-pandemic business strategies that fully integrate with the SDGs and help build more inclusive and sustainable societies.
Thank you so much, Ibu Josephine. And just staying on the topic of partnerships, Dr. Yuki, this is one's for you. One of PTPI's role is, to drive public-private partnerships. So, in terms of identifying and supporting projects, tools, initiatives towards net zero. So in terms of, the topic of PPPs, how can a credit worthiness and quality of such PPPs for net zero Indonesia be improved in the long run?
Okay, thank you, Megan. I think 2 things that can be seen as a reason to choose PPP for the net zero emission programs. First, PPP has always focused on the infrastructure quality and services given through fair risk allocation between the public and also the private investors. And the second, infrastructure development through PPP does not need finance through a state budget on initial phase and only use state budget once it's make a payment through the availability payment. But the consequence would be that a creditworthiness variable and risk management will be the main concern to watch. From these 2 things, it must reflect that the planning stage until the end of concession period. Therefore, I can conclude that PPP could be an option to be chosen for the net zero emission program.
Thank you, Dr. Yuki, on that. We spoke a little about PPPs and also, private investments as well, but we do know also that institutional investors, play quite a huge role as well in terms of channeling sustainable finance. So in terms of, I'm going to come to you, Zoe, on this. How can institutional investors move the needle on channeling sustainable finance into Indonesia's green growth? And really, what sort of risks are institutional investors most concerned by when it comes to investing in Indonesia?
Thank you so much. So on the first one, I mean, when we talk about unlocking capital for green growth, we often talk about it from a bunch of different parties, and it's sometimes easy to talk about how can government engage with that. It's sometimes easy to talk about how companies or projects can engage with it, but it is an interesting question of what can institutional investors do to support that exercise. And I probably would highlight two big steps there. And I'm thinking about institutional investors in country and in region here as well. And the two that I'd highlight firstly is that climate action plans or transition plans really do tend to help with this at the institutional capital provider level, because they, the first thing they do is they force investors or capital providers to get across risk and opportunity. And a lot of times that opens up new risk awareness and also a new appetite to invest. So we work with lots of financial providers who, when you spoke to them before they did their transition plans, they would say to you, yes, well, we know the risks, we know the opportunities, but having been through the transition planning process, have a new level of enthusiasm, let's say, for investing in certain sectors. And that can be the start of that appetite to invest, including the appetite to go into PPPs and other types of collaborations. The other thing that I would note from the institutional investor side is that investors often usefully engage with the government, and many sectors lobby, obviously, but what I mean here is that a lot of governments are really supportive about this at the moment. They want to unlock capital, they want to see growth in these sectors. It is sometimes difficult to know when the private sector tells you that they need 27 different policies, which ones of those are really going to move the dial on financing. So having a really clear ability to communicate what they need is often really productive and really clarifying for government. So I wouldn't downplay that lever for institutional capital in market. It's often unusually powerful. But to the question of the risks of investing in Indonesia, and I want to talk about the risks of actually investing in transition in the region a little bit more broadly, because there are a few of them we see over and over again. And one of them is a lack of business models. And we talked about that earlier, with the policy consistency, creating the business models and the funding models that make these projects more investable. That's an issue across the board. But one of the other ones I just wanted to highlight is there's an incredible range of outcomes in transition. And this is a challenge we see for investors across the region. You have some people who will say to you, we have an industry, a power system that's growing, it's going to be X% renewable, it's the next big thing, we're going to make heaps of money. And then you have other people who say, oh, we're never going to build it that fast, or when we do build it, it's going to drive down the price and then the investment won't be as good. Because the power system is going through transition, the range of outcomes that it could experience is really broad. And so we've seen in some region investors actually stop investing, even though it wasn't, the same levels of assurances that they would have on normal projects weren't enough anymore, because there was this huge range of possible outcomes. And so one of the things that governments can really do to mitigate that risk is just to try and pin that down a bit more, and to really describe very clearly what transition is going to mean in the country, and what directions, what sectors, what solutions are going to be pursued and are going to be priority. That narrows the scope for institutional capital and just decreases the number of risks that they're having to process when they think about investments in green infrastructure and growth sectors.
Thanks, Zoe. That was very informative, and I think I want to go to Pradana on this one to respond to what Zoe has just said in terms of what kind of risks the institutional investors are most concerned by. I think she said lack of business models, policies, but also I guess counterintuitively the big range of outcomes there are for transition finance as well that could create some sort of uncertainty for institutional investors. I would like you, Pradana, to respond to that in terms of what kind of safeguards exist really in Indonesia to allay concerns that have been set out by Zoe and more.
Yeah, and to take SMI as an example, we, as I said, we applied safeguards that is applying pretty much the same principles that is applied internationally. We have 10 principles, ranging from assessments, labor working conditions, pollutions, health and safety, non-nutrition, biodiversity, indigenous people, cultural heritage, energy conservations, and consultation and delivery mechanisms. So all pretty much similar to what's been applied internationally. But I will stress that the maturity of the Indonesian projects and Indonesian developers in thinking about how to integrate this or how to safeguard this risk in the project is not that mature yet. It's not that comprehensive yet. So that's the role of intermediary like us to step in and to provide assistance with the help of our donor partners, yeah, of course, and trying to improve the safeguards applied in projects. So that will help. And what Zoe mentioned, the appetite of international investors. But also, I think because of the quite anomaly that the world is facing with regards to coal, including Indonesia, yeah, but the different kind of anomaly, of course. But I think we also need to decide what kind of asset class this coal transition is. Yeah. So I think we've been talking about carbon verificators internationally. There has been any proven methodology for coal decommissioning, say, for example. So that will help in terms of if the carbon verifiers can actually verify the numbers of carbon saved in one asset class. So that will generate more investment appetite from international investors. But the bottom line is, yeah, I think safeguards growth narrative is all important, yeah, and it's all going to be looked at, particularly from international investors. But the bottom line is sustained and steady cash flow, which is what most institutional investors will look at, be it from overseas or from Indonesia. Moreover, from Indonesia, because they're still talking about bottom line basically. So we need to cherry pick the right project and the right stage of the project to actually sell to those investors. We're not going to be able to successfully attract much investment in the greenfield side of projects, but the operational projects certainly there will be more appetite. So that's why we need a lot of certainty what kind of asset class it is. We've been talking about in parallel with the OJK, our Financial Service Authority, to be able to issue a transition taxonomy. I hope that will help somewhat, yeah, particularly in the domestic market. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Pradana. I wasn't sure, Zoe, do you want to comment or bounce off that really?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the last point about the transition taxonomy is an excellent one to bring up. Obviously, transition taxonomies are under development in quite a few regions at the moment, and they are a really, really effective way of signaling to an institutional investor base that is very interested in this and needs to find a way to relate to it. That an investment is green and it's considered to be green in the context of the economy that you're working in and the country you're working in as well. We are a little bit at risk. We have the same problem in some of the regions we work in, of having European standards of what is green basically passed internationally, and then what looks like a transition infrastructure asset in Europe is very different to what a transition infrastructure asset or a plane might be in Southeast Asia. And the taxonomies will really help with that, help clarify and make it clear what is a transition or sustainable infrastructure development in Asia and when that might differ from a situation in Europe. But I just also wanted to reinforce the point about cash flows. We talk a lot, investors talk a lot about having the ambition to finance transition and finance sustainable development. They do, but institutional investors all are bound by rules and obligations, and they're not allowed to generally put money forth unless it meets commercial conditions. So we talk to a lot of governments saying, create the commercial conditions, create the business models, and then that really, really helps unlock the financing.
Yuki need to guarantee more project, Pak.
Yeah.
He already has 42. Need some more from the Ibu Josephine, I'm not sure, do you also want to comment on that, on this point that we were just talking about in terms of, transition finance, the transition taxonomy as well that has been developed?
Yeah, I think what businesses are looking is clear law regulations. It's a transparency that needs to put them into the right directions in terms of managing risk, especially for investment. Other than that, it's all well said. I have nothing further to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josephine. Pradana, earlier I saw you said that it's quite important for Indonesia to cherry pick the right projects to sell to investors. So I guess the question that I want to put to Dr. Yuki, what are the most strategic sectors for Indonesia to focus on when it comes to fostering PPPs and also managing the risk involved for international investors, whether private or institutional?
Okay, thank you, Megan. I think currently on the PPP regulation, there are 20 sectors that can be done through a PPP scheme based on Indonesia regulations that correlated with the basic necessities, what I say before. I think the strategic sector that can be done through a PPP are the one relates to necessities and connectivity, such as clean water provisions, waste management, road to interconnection once a province to other province, and also telecommunications, especially for the pandemic situation, telecommunication for the Zoom, and also communication is most important. I think this is my answer, Megan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yuki. And Pradana, do you have any input on that as well?
Yeah, again, because coal transition is quite high on my head right now. I just want to balance the idea. If this is going to be, let's say, for example, it's going to be considered as a unique asset class, and it's being backed up by the right taxonomy and the right carbon credit methodology, whether it's and it's already operated. Albeit it's going to be a shortened, but whether it's going to attract international investors or not. So this is the $1 million questions in my head at the moment. So I don't have the answer right now, but we keep trying to do that.
Thank you so much, Pradana. And I guess in terms of, the kind of, coming off the back of COVID-19 pandemic together with, the geopolitical tensions that we are seeing right now, we know that, I guess, stability in terms of regulatory or financial frameworks would be all the more better for Indonesia to attract investments in. So what are some form of regulatory or finance frameworks that could allow for the government to balance between the need for economic stability and also the need for stable investments? Bu Josephine, I'm going to go to you first.
I think for Indonesia, our financial obligation body, OJK, has issued a number of regulations already. Name a few, like the POJK 51 year 2017 on sustainable finance and sustainability reporting for transparency. POJK 11 year 2020 on economic stimulus, counter cyclical on the impact of COVID-19. And I think there are many others. POJK 2 recently, in 2022 on consumer protections in the financial sector, and many others. The governments are trying to balance the economy. I think the progress of the economy and the and the need for sustainable investment. And I think we are getting there, or maybe not fast enough, but slowly we're getting there to attract finance investment in Indonesia.
Thank you, Bu Josephine. And Pradana, do you have any inputs on that as well?
We, as a financial institution, we are being regulated by OJK, of course. OJK has issued OJK Regulation number 51, 2017 about sustainable finance, and they promote intermediary institutions like us to actually go out and ensure that sustainable practices has been applied in projects that we land. And then, of course, disclosures, sustainability reporting, and sustainable action plan. Those kind of things is going to become more and more of a norm. We have us and the big banks already form a what do you call it? Association. Yeah, it's not yet association, but a group that is going to having a knowledge sharing together among ourselves about sustainable practice. So that's hopefully it can be enlarged to all other financial institutions. But I think the clarity in general, the clarity of policies and to promote level playing field, it's something that the government can actually do more. That they will start with roadmap, transition roadmaps, for example, and clear story that all will be able to understand clearly. I think if we start from that, I think the government has already started well in terms of they have issued the greenest ever electricity plan a couple of years ago, and now they just have to make the step up to transition master plan. So I think that's that's going to be a welcome news if the government can do so in the near future.
Thank you so much, Pradana, for providing your input on that. I know that before I go on to Zoe and Dr. Yuki, we just opened the chat box for your questions, please. So please do put your questions in there. And I think I already see quite interesting ones from Yang Lei and also Manish Shankar. So I'll go to that in a little bit, but would like to also get your inputs on, the regulatory and financial framework question from Dr. Yuki.
Yeah. Thank you, Megan. I will try to answer through a PPP perspective or what the area we work. Through PPP regulation perspective and infrastructure as a whole, for PPP, the regulation already has been established a framework, I think, including the regulation on the obligation to include the environmental and social aspect on the final business case document, to include the environmental and social obligation on its stakeholders, not only in the final business case, but this is implement in the contracts. As for the infrastructure regulation, the current regulation is already comprehensive enough, but still developed from national law level all the way the ministerial law level. As I mentioned before, currently the Ministry of Finance is developing an ASG manual or framework to be mandatory to implementation, mainly for the project that get support from the government, such as project development facilities, viability gap fund, sovereign guarantee, and other support.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yogi, for that. I wanted to also pose this question, Zoe. It's quite an interesting one from Yang Lei, and also in line with what we spoke about in terms of regulatory framework as well. Inconsistent public policy has been mentioned as an obstacle to investment. Are there any examples you've seen?
Well, it's a really excellent question, and I would respond to it partially by talking about the depth of policy. Right, one of the things that we see happen over and over again. And to Pradana's point about transition roadmaps is that you'll have a headline ambition, but you won't yet have appropriate policy system or roadmap to support that ambition. And in addition to that, you will often still have development policies that were pre-transition, let's call it that, or pre-climate change targets, or pre-sustainable development that are still running. And those might include, quite significant, depending on what context you're in, quite significant fossil fuel development incentives as one that often comes up, sitting alongside a government transition system, which is sort of saying we're sort of broadly going to be heading in that direction, but we don't really know how yet. And we haven't arranged our policy system so that it supports that wholly. And I really want to reinforce the importance of the transition roadmap or master plan, because I do feel for governments in doing this, because they're having to build very long run plans that are at an unusual level of detail and prescriptiveness about how the economy is going to evolve and how it's going to move. That's not an easy task. None of us have crystal balls, but developing depth in transition plans, some of the regions we see that do this very successfully have a long run set of goals supported by 5-year plans. So they break it down into 5-year ratchet plans. And those 5-year ratchet plans often include things that go to the depth of, these are the 2 or 3 sectors that we need to really emphasize in this particular 5-year plan. We know that these sectors are going to come later, but in this particular piece, this is our technology investment plan for those sectors as an example. And also in this 5-year period, to go to the point about coal closure, we identify that we have these specific existing policy systems that have to be adjusted, or we have new models that we need to build, new policy models that will be the project, and the private sector can prepare for that project. So that's a level of policy detail that is unusual. I'm sort of talking about some of the jurisdictions that have been best in the world at leveraging private capital, but nonetheless can be really, really effective in unlocking a lot of appetite and a really significant partner in transition. But one of the things I just wanted to highlight on this question is that I think there's also a really important need to make it clear to the right stakeholders and everyone that sustainable infrastructure investments should decrease instability, economic instability. So they reduce exposure to fossil fuel commodities, and they produce more durable growth industries as well, particularly as we're going through the process globally. And I'd extend that to resilience, which is really, really important for the region. So, we often talk about SDGs and we talk about low carbon and water and social, but there's also a resilience piece there. And that's really, really important in Southeast Asia. And it will also have the impact of reducing instability by reducing exposure to ongoing events at the same time as reducing exposure to climate change as it gets worse.
Thank you, Zoe, for providing your response to that. I think that, that really leads quite nicely into Langley's second question, like this probably is the $1 billion or the $1 trillion question here. How realistic is it that in the current global situation, as I said, considering, of the COVID-19 pandemic, the geopolitical tensions with rising energy prices, that Indonesia will receive enough funding to be able to close a substantial number of coal plants, many of which are young. Pradana, would you like to take this one?
I think it depends. It depends how Indonesia will approach this. I think in terms of energy transitions, we are lucky that somebody else has made the steps before us. Let's say, for example, South Africa. So what we are going to do differently this time is, I think, going to elaborate more on Zoe's point there, that we don't actually just need the narrative, the storyline. We also need the pipelines, the project pipelines. So we do both simultaneously at the moment. So we do the top-down approach, where the government policymakers will decide on the narrative on the transitions. But at the same time, we also doing the due diligence on a project level basis. Yeah. So, like for example, we've been assisted greatly by donors like ADB and other partners that discussing intensely with PLN and what is going to be the most logical projects to approach first, and what kind of staging that we are thinking about. So those a mixture of top-down approach and bottom-up approaches. What we're trying to do to increase the credibility of our plans.
Thank you so much, Pradana, for that. I think Liang also had one more question for you, but if you would like to respond to him directly on his third one there in terms of the energy sector, coming second versus forestry in greenhouse gas emissions cut, you can just message him or type on the chat as well, because I see that we have quite a bit of questions to go through and we are a little bit running short of time. But I wanted to go to this one from Chris. Dr. Yuki, I think this one will be coming to you. One of the areas which can assist acceleration is to encourage small to medium scale waste to energy generation, particularly relevant to island regions. The major roadblock to these is the virtually impossible access to project finance at a comparatively low capex. The necessary technology is widely available. Linking the individual nodes is easy and inexpensive. Comments, please. Dr. Yuki, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for the questions. I think if we talk about the waste to energy, I think for the Indonesia and also developing countries is quite challenging, because in my opinions, for the waste to energy technology is still expensive for the governments, subnational level governments, and that's why we need to accelerate with two keys. The first key is the collaborations. We need to create the technology cheaper than current technologies. And for the second is how to create collaboration with the financial institutions, especially for the international institution to create more attractive financial for the waste to energies. I think currently Pak Pradana and SMI also provide the green climate funds to access WTE or WTE technologies. We need to accelerate and also how to create more attractive waste to energy for the society. I think this is Megan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yuki. I'm going to just take one more question, and then I've got one final question just because we're running short of time, but thank you so much for the questions here. I'm going to take the one from Putra. So most green projects are dedicated to mitigation, including GCF. Is there white space PPP for adaptation projects? What aspects need to be enhanced as he sees that there are no climate risk considerations in the ESG or other safeguards? For Pak Pradana and Yuki, how do you link with the adaptation targets, and for Zoe, do we have any good practice in climate resilient infrastructure? I'm going to give you just 1 minute each, if you can keep to that, so that we can end off with the final question. Pak Pradana, would you like to proceed first?
Yeah, thank you, Megan. I think understood. We also understand the point of view of GCF, that they want to push for more adaptation projects, because they receive a lot of mitigation proposal, but not adaptation. But that reflects the state the individual countries are in, including Indonesia. We need more development rather than adaptation. So again, it's a balancing act, and PPP. Our PPP policy is also built based on that. Is to support development. So new projects to be built using PPP schemes. But we also understand that we have to do something in the adaptation front. And with the momentum of this energy transitions, we hope that this PPP policy can also be adopted. to also include this adaptation from the environment. I think that's what the first answer. The second answer is in SMI. ESMF, we don't actually have the specific title of a climate risk, but we do have all that relates to it, like pollutions, health and safety, natural resource management, and environmental sound energy. So I think that's trying to answer the question.
Thank you so much, Rana, for that. Dr. Yuki, would you like to comment on that as well?
Yeah, I want to add, Pak Pradana mentioned before, for IGF, the climate risk is one of the important thing in the evaluation stage. We need to make sure the evaluation to ensure the project will have a risk mitigation plan to reduce or mitigation the climate risk consideration until the preparation stage, from the preparation stage until the end of the projects. I think we have one tools as I call is risk mitigation plans, and this is mandatory to government contracting agency to implement the risk mitigation plan, and also the company or private sector to implement risk mitigation plan. What we state in the guarantee agreement and also recourse agreements. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yuki, for that. For Zoe, if you have one good practice you've seen in climate resilient infrastructure.
I wish I could say that I have a really good model to put forward. I mean, one of the things that is most difficult about resilient infrastructure, we've seen regions that have put requirements in place for new projects for resilient infrastructure had a really difficult time actually doing the big ones. The little ones are okay. It's the really big transformative ones that actually change the resilience of the area that are hard. But one of the things I just would note is it's been particularly hard to get the private sector to fund resilience to date. I don't have a solution for that yet. We are having experience here and in Europe that willingness is going up as the cost of climate change events is also going up. That's not a great way to increase the funding ambition, but at the moment the private funding ambition has been quite low, and so that's been one of the very few pathways that's worked.
Thank you so much, Zoe, for that. And with that, I've come to just a final question, just to round off this discussion, really. And thank you again to all our speakers for providing, such thought-provoking, responses to the questions. So with that, the final question to all of you, if there's one thing we need to do to accelerate Indonesia's green growth potential and ambition, what would it be? And the key is just one thing. I'm going to keep your answers to 30 seconds or 45 seconds tops, okay? If just something we'd like to start us off.
Yeah, Megan, the participating companies of UN Global Compact has the 10 universal fundamental values and principles to integrate their business strategy and operations, respecting human rights, labor's rights, taking care of the environment, and business that is anti-corruption. So based on a number of studies by, name a few, BCG, Accenture, Arabesque, among others, this brings not just strong values and benefits in ESG, but also in economic values, as studies reveals that UN Global participating companies outperform their peers more. So I guess, doing things, progressing and then investing is important, but the fundamental base of respecting human rights, respecting labors and taking care of environment, and the way you govern your business, in a anti-corruption way, will make sure that you will progress more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bu Josephine. And to Pradana, to provide one thing that we need to do to accelerate Indonesia's green growth potential.
I like to say a consistent policy, but since I cannot say on behalf of government, what I can say is that the role of intermediary institutions like us. We have a lot. Yes, we have SMI in infrastructure financing. We have IGF in infrastructure guarantee. We have INA, the sovereign investment vehicle. Lots of us, and I think the role of intermediary institutions needs to be expanded and empowered, and I think we can do more with the help of our international donors partners. Yeah.
Thank you, Pradana, for providing that perspective. And on to Dr. Yuki.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. I think in my my opinion is not enough for only one things, Megan, but perhaps two things, minimum of two things. Those are affordable. The first is affordable technology and alternative financing mechanism to produce lower project costs. This way, that will impact to the price of the new energy, renewable energy. I think this is, and if we can add one thing is how to mitigate the environmental and social risks. I think this is Megan.
No, that's very good. Thank you so much, Dr. Yuki. And finally, but not least, Zoe.
Thank you. Very quickly, just I'm gonna take the point that Pradana made very gently and make it strongly. Consistent policy that can actually allow you to develop the demand you need, to develop the business models, and then to stand up the sectors, the sustainable infrastructure sectors. If you do that, you get the whole system working behind you, and a lot of that international institutional finance and support basically can come online. So that would be my, if I had to choose one thing.
Thank you so much, Zoe. And then once again, thank you to Bu Josephine, Pradana, Zoe, and Dr. Yuki for providing us such a thoughtful and much needed discussion. I'm going to hand the remaining 90 seconds, 2 minutes back to Ami really to wrap up our discussion. But thank you everyone again for being with us today. Ami, over to you.
Thanks, Megan, and thank you to our esteemed panelists for the engaging discussion on investing in a greener and stronger Indonesia. I have the challenge of summarizing that really intense discussion in 2 minutes. So almost at the end of this event, and apologies for running over time, but I will wrap up with a summary of what's been discussed so that we all can walk away, with the information in our minds. Okay, so the discussion that we've had the privilege of enjoying over the last hour or so was really talking about unlocking the future resilience and continued economic growth of Indonesia through bridging the gap between setting the right ambition for sustainable infrastructure and unlocking the finance needed to do that. And to unlock that finance, towards sustainable infrastructure, there are so many things that we need to consider when it comes to thinking about what investors look out for, particularly consistent policies that will unlock more finance, but also a range of other things to consider: a clear sustainability strategy and that is visible to the right people, to the right investors, a clear climate action plan with enough depth and detail. We also have to think about the clarity on what kind of asset class we're talking about, the transition taxonomy that allows for transition finance, and also to think about whether projects are able to take off in the first place, so whether they're operating. So many things among others when investors are like investing against a funding model and a business model. We also discussed the sector-specific blind spots that I personally thought was very interesting when it comes to sustainable infrastructure development. For renewable energy, for example, a lot of us think about the renewable energy technologies, but maybe we can also think about the flip side, which is to retire coal. And that's a whole other challenge that maybe we can give more attention to. Waste to energy was also discussed, and in that, the blind spot was to think about how subnational government levels may not have that funding required to procure the technology that is maybe cheaper when it comes to budgets at the national federal level. or things like that, right? And two more things that I noted at the top line level. One is that we do have to consider the wider operating context, in this case of Indonesia, because there's two things here. One being to think about upstream to downstream infrastructure development as very important when it comes to safeguarding against the economic, environmental, and social impacts of our economic growth. And the other thing would be to think about affordable tech and alternative financing to actually kind of engender a green growth that is inclusive to help Indonesia and Indonesians transition as one country. Finally, I just wanted to highlight that the discussion really brought up the important role of the intermediaries like PT SME, even IIGF as well, in bridging that gap, because the safeguards of the ecosystem are not yet mature, even though they have been planted for a while. And these intermediaries play that important role of cherry picking the right projects and ensuring investors that these projects have sustainability embedded and package it in the right stories so that finance can come through for a stronger Indonesia in the future. So that's really that summary that I have for you today. That's what I took away from the really interesting and very erudite discussion, honestly, on the topic. So once again, I'd really like to thank our panel speakers and our keynote speaker for making the time to join us and to share your valued expertise and experience with us all. We are really grateful for you. It has been an amazing 2 hours with all of you today, and we'd really like to keep this conversation going. So thanks for joining us today, and please do join us once again on the 21st of September for our main hybrid event in Singapore on unlocking capital for sustainability in 2022. Details on this event, as well as the upcoming Philippine and India events, will be on our website, as well as in the chat box if you scroll up. So do reach out to us at EcoBusiness if you need more info. So till then, sampai jumpa lagi, and see you again on the 21st. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Ami. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Pak
Thank you
Pradana.
everyone so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bu Josephine. Thanks, Pradana, Dr. Yuki, and Zoe.